She was forced to marry her sister's millionaire groom in Coma. A shocking twist changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. She was forced to marry her sister's millionaire groom who lay in a coma. That shocking twist changed everything. On the morning of the wedding, the sky was gray, as if the heavens themselves were mourning. The bride was not the woman everyone expected. The real bride, the beloved older sister, lay unconscious in St. Mary's Hospital after a sudden accident. The family, desperate to protect their reputation and the financial alliance with the wealthy groom's household, turned to the younger sister. She was quiet, humble, and always the shadow compared to her radiant sibling. Yet on that day, she was pushed into a white dress that did not belong to her and guided toward a ceremony that felt more like a cage than a celebration. The mansion's grand hall was decorated with roses, chandeliers, and a red carpet, but none of it could cover the emptiness in her chest. Guests whispered, confused by the pale bride. Some wondered why the groom was not present. Others dared not question the powerful families involved. The truth was that the groom lay still in a hospital bed, machines keeping him alive, while his family orchestrated this charade. Her mother's voice echoed sharply in her ears. "You must do this. Do you want our family to be ruined? Do you want your sister's engagement to be mocked? Just stand there, sign the paper, and keep quiet." The words sliced deeper than any blade. Her father avoided her gaze, his silence another heavy chain around her ankles. She walked step by step, her heels clicking like a countdown to her own imprisonment. The officiant cleared his throat and read the vows. No music played, no joy filled the air. She glanced at the empty chair that should have held her sister. She wanted to scream, to run, but the eyes of dozens of people bore into her like iron shackles. When the moment came to sign, her hand trembled. The pen felt heavier than stone. She wrote her name beside his, a man she had never loved, a man who did not even know she was taking his unconscious bride's place. The paper was folded, sealed, and the deal was done. Applause broke out, hollow and forced. She felt none of it. That night, as she sat alone in the bridal chamber, the weight of the veil pressed down like a suffocating shroud. She stared at the mirror and barely recognized the reflection. "What have I become?" she whispered, tears staining her face. She was no longer herself. She was only a replacement, a pawn, a ghost bride in a cruel game of power and wealth. Yet in that silence, a thought flickered, fragile but alive. Perhaps this story is not finished. Perhaps there is more than just despair. Little did she know, this forced marriage would awaken storms of betrayal, revelation, and an unexpected love that would change her life forever. That was the beginning. And the shocking twist had only just begun. The ink on the marriage certificate had barely dried, yet the weight of it already crushed her. That single paper transformed her from a forgotten daughter into a wife in name only. She was bound to a man she did not know, a man who was supposed to marry her sister, a man who lay motionless in a hospital bed. The house she was brought into was not a home. It was a fortress of wealth, silent and cold, where even the walls seemed to judge her. The contract was explained to her that very night. His mother, elegant and stern, slid the documents across a polished oak table. "You are to remain his legal wife until circumstances change. You will not speak to the press. You will not embarrass this family. In exchange, your family will be compensated. Your sister's reputation will remain intact. And you, my dear, will stay invisible." Her voice carried no warmth, only the sharp edge of control. The young bride looked down at the clauses. Every line reduced her life to conditions and prohibitions. She was forbidden from making independent decisions. She was forbidden from touching the family's financial accounts. She was even forbidden from leaving without permission. The pen she held trembled again. The first signature had already sealed her fate, but now these additional agreements tightened the chains around her wrists. She signed once more. Her new home was vast and magnificent. Marble floors stretched across endless hallways, golden frames held portraits of stern ancestors, and crystal chandeliers glistened in every room. Yet to her, every sparkle was cold. Servants moved quietly, avoiding eye contact as if instructed. When she passed, they bowed slightly, not out of respect, but out of habit. She was not the bride they expected, and they made sure she felt that. At night, when the house fell silent, she sat in a corner of the guest bedroom they had assigned her. Though she was legally the wife of a millionaire, she was not placed in the master's suite. That room was locked, untouched, reserved for the bride who was meant to be. The contrast cut deeper than any words could. Her parents came to visit once, but not to comfort her. Her mother reminded her of the family's debt, of how much they owed to the groom's fortune. "You are saving us," her mother insisted. "Your sacrifice is for the good of everyone." Her father stood in the corner, silent again, his hands clenched, his eyes avoiding hers. She realized then that she had no allies, no one who saw her suffering as real. In the hospital, the groom remained in a coma. Machines hummed, monitors beeped steadily, his chest rose and fell, but his eyes never opened. She visited once, quietly, without permission. She stood by his bedside and looked at the man who had unknowingly trapped her in this fate. His face was pale, his jaw strong, his hand cold to the touch. She whispered, "I did not choose this, and neither did you." Her voice cracked, and she left before anyone noticed. Days turned into weeks. She performed her duties like a ghost. At dinners, she sat quietly, answering politely, never drawing attention. When the media asked questions, the family crafted statements, and she was paraded as the loyal wife, the dutiful daughter-in-law. Cameras flashed, headlines speculated, but behind closed doors, she was a prisoner. Still, within her heart, a small ember remained. She remembered her own dreams, the ones she had before this marriage. She once wanted to paint, to create color and light on canvas. Now her sketchbook lay hidden under the bed, untouched. She feared discovery, yet she also feared forgetting who she truly was. One night, she opened it again. The first stroke of the pencil was shaky, but then another followed, and soon the page filled with the shadow of the mansion, the outlines of locked doors, the empty chair at the wedding. Tears fell onto the paper, smudging the lines, but she did not stop. It was the only thing that reminded her she was still alive. The contract had caged her body, but her spirit still fought to breathe. She did not know it yet, but this small act of resistance would be the beginning of a storm that no contract, no family, and no fortune could ever contain. The weeks of silence ended with a single phone call. It was early morning when the household erupted. Servants rushed through the marble hallways, and the air buzzed with panic and disbelief. The millionaire groom, who had been lying unconscious in St. Mary's Hospital for months, had opened his eyes. She stood frozen as the chauffeur delivered the news. Her heart raced, not with joy, but with dread. What would he say when he discovered the truth? That the woman who wore his ring was not the one he had chosen, but the younger sister forced into his life. When she was brought to the hospital, the scene was chaos. Doctors surrounded his bed, checking his vitals, shining lights into his eyes. His family crowded the room, weeping with relief. She stood at the back, clutching her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her mother-in-law spotted her and, with a firm hand on her arm, dragged her forward. "Go, stand by him. You are his wife now." The words were sharp, leaving no room for hesitation. His eyes, once closed for so long, fluttered open. They were cold, piercing, and full of confusion. He scanned the room until they landed on her. She forced a smile, but her lips quivered. He blinked, then frowned. His voice was hoarse but strong enough to cut through the silence. "You! Who are you?" The room went still. Gasps echoed. She felt her knees weaken, but the mother-in-law intervened swiftly, announcing, "She is your wife. She has been waiting for you faithfully." Her stomach twisted at the lie, but she remained silent. The groom's eyes narrowed. His gaze lingered on her face, suspicious, untrusting. In the days that followed, his recovery continued at home. Yet with every step he regained, his hostility toward her sharpened. When she tried to help him walk, he pushed her hand away. When she brought soup to his room, he glared and asked her to leave it on the table. His words were edged with bitterness. "Do not pretend you care. I know this marriage is not what it seems." One evening, the tension exploded. He cornered her in the grand hallway, his voice low and furious. "Tell me the truth. Why are you here? Where is she? Where is the woman I was supposed to marry?" His hand slammed against the wall beside her, the sound echoing through the empty corridor. Her chest tightened, her eyes filled with tears, but she stood her ground. "I did not choose this. I was forced. Your family, my family, they decided everything. I am only here because no one else would protect my sister's name." Her voice cracked under the weight of the confession. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. He studied her with disbelief, then anger. "So you admit it. You stole her place." His words pierced her heart like a blade. She wanted to scream that she was not a thief, that she was as much a victim as he was, but no words could reach him through the storm in his mind. From that night on, the mansion became a battlefield. He ignored her presence, treating her as though she were invisible. At dinners, he spoke only to his parents. In public, he kept his distance, walking ahead while she followed like a shadow. Reporters still snapped photographs, praising the loyalty of the young wife who stood by her husband through his recovery. To the world, they looked like a devoted couple. Behind closed doors, they were strangers locked in silent war. Yet even in his coldness, moments of contradiction appeared. One afternoon, as she nearly slipped on the marble staircase, his hand shot out instinctively, catching her before she fell. Their eyes met, his grip firm around her arm, but he released her quickly, muttering under his breath, "Do not be careless." She felt the conflict in his touch, the unspoken truth that his heart was not entirely made of stone. Her nights grew lonelier, filled with tears she dared not shed in daylight. She clutched her sketchbook, the pages now filled with dark strokes, storm clouds, and locked doors. Every line reflected her struggle, her fight to remain herself in a life that was never hers to begin with. The clash between them had only begun. What neither of them knew was that this forced marriage would unravel secrets far deeper than lies at the altar. And soon, every mask would be torn away. The mansion no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a cage where every room echoed with unspoken resentment. After his recovery, the millionaire groom returned to his routines with sharp precision, as if to remind her that she was nothing more than an unwanted guest in his life. Yet because of the contract and the watchful eyes of both families, they were forced to live together under the same roof. Their coexistence was tense from the start. At breakfast, she sat quietly across the long dining table, her plate untouched. He read the newspaper, the rustle of the pages louder than any conversation between them. When she tried to speak, offering to pour him coffee, he cut her off with a curt, "Do not bother." She lowered her eyes, swallowing her pride, her hands trembling as she returned the coffee pot to the table. Despite his coldness, fate pushed them into daily collisions. One rainy evening, the power went out in the mansion. She stumbled through the dark hallways with only a candle, startled by a sudden clap of thunder. As she rounded a corner, she collided with him. The candle nearly dropped, but his hand shot out to steady it. For a heartbeat, their faces were close, the flickering flame casting shadows across his sharp features. She whispered an apology and tried to step away, but his grip lingered before he finally released her. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Her presence began to creep into his life, in ways he could not ignore. When his physical therapist came to guide him through his exercises, she quietly assisted, holding his water, adjusting the pillows, offering encouragement. At first, he dismissed her with annoyance. But one afternoon, when his legs nearly buckled under him, it was her quick reflex that saved him from falling. She wrapped her arms around him, steadying his weight. For a moment, his breath caught, and he felt the warmth of her sincerity. He pulled away sharply, his pride unwilling to acknowledge the gratitude he felt. At night, their paths crossed again. She often sat in the library, sketching by the firelight, her face soft and lost in thought. He once paused in the doorway, unseen, watching the way her pencil glided across the page. The sketch was of the mansion, but not the grandeur, the shadows, the loneliness, the isolation. For the first time, he wondered if she saw the world as he secretly did. Their arguments continued, small but sharp. One morning, He accused her of using the marriage for status. Her voice cracked as she answered, "If I wanted wealth, do you think I would spend my nights crying alone in a room that is not even mine?" He froze, not expecting her to push back. Her words lingered, gnawing at the certainty of his anger. In public, they continued the performance. They attended a charity gala together, walking arm in arm as cameras flashed. She wore a borrowed gown, simple but elegant. And for the first time, people whispered about her beauty rather than her scandal. He felt a strange surge of pride standing beside her, though he quickly buried it under his usual coldness. When a reporter asked about their marriage, he smiled tightly and said, "We are stronger than ever." The lie tasted bitter. But it was easier than admitting the confusing truth. Back at the mansion, she tended to his mother during an unexpected illness. He watched from the doorway as she gently placed a cool cloth on the older woman's forehead. Her voice soft and soothing. His mother, usually stern, actually smiled. The sight unsettled him. This woman, the replacement bride he had resented, was slowly weaving herself into the very fabric of his family's life. Every shared moment, every unexpected kindness, chipped away at the walls he had built. Still, he resisted. He reminded himself of the betrayal, of the lies that forced them into this union. But in the quiet hours, when he caught the sound of her laughter in the garden, or saw her sketching in solitude, something inside him began to shift. They were still strangers bound by duty, but the threads of something fragile and real were beginning to form. Neither of them admitted it aloud, yet both felt it. The forced coexistence was no longer just survival. It was becoming something neither of them had expected, and both of them feared to name. It was in the small, ordinary moments that his walls began to crumble. Though he fought against it, he could not ignore the way she carried herself, quiet but steady, her kindness shining even when no one else was watching. One evening, he entered the kitchen late at night, expecting silence. Instead, he found her standing by the stove, carefully preparing soup. She startled when he appeared, nearly dropping the spoon. "I thought you might be hungry," she said softly, her eyes lowering as if afraid of rejection. He almost brushed it off with his usual coldness, but the aroma stirred something familiar. He took a cautious sip. It was the same recipe his late grandmother used to make. He froze, his chest tightening. She explained she had overheard his mother reminiscing and decided to try. For the first time, he tasted not just food, but memory, and it shook him. Another day, he discovered her in the garden, bent over a small patch of flowers. She was pulling weeds with dirt-stained hands, sweat shining on her forehead. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply. She looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "Your mother said these used to be her favorite. I thought I could bring them back to life." He stared at her, unable to speak. This woman, whom he had accused of being a fraud, was restoring what his family had forgotten. Her quiet actions began to weave threads of trust. When his physical therapy sessions left him frustrated and angry, she sat nearby with her sketchbook, drawing in silence. At first, he resented her presence, but one afternoon he glanced at the page and froze. She had sketched him, not as the powerful millionaire everyone saw, but as a man struggling to stand, gripping the parallel bars, sweat dripping down his temples. The raw honesty of it left him shaken. "Why would you draw me like that?" he asked, his voice unsteady. She answered simply, "Because that is the truth, and the truth is not weakness." Her words echoed in his mind long after. He began noticing the details he once ignored, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous, the way she spoke gently to the servants, who had always dismissed her, the way she carried loneliness yet still gave warmth to others. One rainy afternoon, he found her sitting alone in the library, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her sketchbook. He had intended to walk away, but something rooted him to the spot. He stepped closer, his voice softer than he intended. "Why are you crying?" She quickly wiped her cheeks and shook her head. "It does not matter." He pressed gently. "Tell me." Finally she whispered, "Because I do not know who I am anymore. Am I a wife? A sister's shadow? A prisoner? I feel like I have lost myself." Her honesty cut through him. For the first time, he saw not an intruder but a woman breaking under the weight of sacrifice. That night, unable to sleep, he walked the halls and found himself outside her door. He hesitated, then turned away, but the urge to protect her lingered. The next morning, when the servants gossiped harshly about her, he silenced them with a single glare. It was the first time he defended her, even if she did not know. The turning point came during a family dinner. His mother, feeling better, praised her openly for her care. The room fell silent as all eyes turned. He watched her blush, fumbling for words, her humility genuine. Something inside him shifted. The bitterness that had poisoned him since the wedding began to dissolve. Late that evening, he returned to the library and found the sketchbook left open on the table. On the newest page, she had drawn not shadows or despair, but a sunrise breaking over the mansion. He stared at it, a strange warmth filling his chest. For the first time since waking from the coma, he allowed himself to hope. The woman he had once despised was no longer just his wife by contract. She was becoming the one person who could see the truth of who he was, and that realization terrified him more than the lie that had begun their marriage. The fragile peace between them did not last long. Just as the threads of trust were beginning to form, the weight of secrets and lies came crashing down. It started with whispers in the grand dining room, servants passing folded papers behind closed doors, and then an urgent meeting called by his parents. One evening, she was summoned to the study. The groom's father sat rigid behind the desk, his expression severe, while his mother stood nearby, her pearl necklace gleaming in the lamplight. The groom himself leaned against the fireplace, his face unreadable. His father's voice cut through the silence. "We know the truth. You were not the intended bride. You married in place of your sister." Her breath caught. Though she had always feared this confrontation, hearing the accusation aloud was a blade through her chest. She tried to speak, to explain, but the father's hand slammed the desk. "You have deceived us all. This marriage is a disgrace to our name. It must be annulled immediately." The mother's eyes softened for only a moment, then hardened again. "You should leave quietly. If the press learns of this, it will destroy everything. Our reputation, our son's credibility, and your sister's honor." The groom's voice broke in, colder than ice. "So it is true. You are nothing but a stand-in." The words cut her deeper than any blade. She looked at him, the man whose trust she had slowly earned, the man who had seen glimpses of her true heart. His eyes no longer held warmth but betrayal. Tears stung her eyes as she whispered, "I never wanted this. I never asked for it. They forced me." Her hands trembled, clutching the folds of her dress. "Every day I live here, I live as a prisoner of choices that were not mine." But her words were drowned by his silence, his gaze burning with anger he could not contain. That night, her own family cornered her as well. Her mother pulled her aside, her grip bruising on her arm. "You cannot ruin this. Do you understand? If you fight, if you speak out, we will lose everything. Your sister's engagement will be mocked, our family will be humiliated, and we will never recover." Her father avoided her eyes again, his silence heavier than his words. They treated her not as a daughter, but as collateral in a cruel bargain. The weight of both families crushed her. Alone in her room, she pressed her face into her pillow, her sobs muffled but relentless. Her sketchbook lay open, the pencil rolling across the page. The unfinished drawing of a sunrise blurred as her tears fell, staining the paper. The next day, the groom confronted her in the garden. His voice was sharp, his eyes blazing. "Why did you not tell me? Why did you let me believe this farce?" She lifted her chin, meeting his fury with raw honesty. "Because no one ever gave me the chance. Because I was afraid. Because I thought if I stayed silent, maybe I could protect everyone, even you." For a fleeting second, his expression faltered, but then the anger returned. "Protect me? You have trapped me in a lie." His words struck like a hammer, and she staggered under the weight of them. He turned away, leaving her standing in the garden, her hands trembling, the flowers around her swaying in the wind as if mourning her despair. From that moment, the mansion became colder than ever. The few moments of fragile connection they had shared vanished like smoke. At meals, he no longer looked at her. At night, she heard his footsteps in the hall, but never near her door. The servants whispered louder now, their disdain unchecked. She had lost what little ground she had gained. Still, deep inside, she refused to surrender completely. She held on to one truth. She had never lied about her heart. She had never asked for this marriage, but she had lived it with sincerity. Whether he believed it or not, she had given pieces of herself she could never take back. The storm of confrontation had only begun. Behind the polished doors of the mansion, betrayal, fear, and anger brewed. And soon, the truth about who was really guilty would rise to the surface, tearing apart every mask that had been carefully built. The days after the confrontation became unbearable. She moved through the mansion like a shadow, her footsteps silent, her presence ignored. The whispers grew louder, the stares sharper. Even the servants who once bowed with distant respect now looked at her with thinly veiled contempt. The air was heavy with judgment, and every corner of the house reminded her that she did not belong. Her decision came one sleepless night. She sat by the window, staring at the city lights in the distance. Her heart was heavy, but clarity cut through the fog of despair. If her presence brought shame, if her existence only deepened the wound, then perhaps the greatest act of love was to leave. She whispered to herself, maybe my absence will finally set him free. The next morning, she packed her few belongings quietly, a handful of clothes, her sketchbook, and a single framed photograph of her and her sister before life twisted into this cruel fate. She moved through the hallways unnoticed, as if the house itself had already erased her. Before she could step out, she heard his voice. He stood at the end of the corridor, his expression unreadable. "Where are you going?" The question hung heavy in the air. She turned slowly, her eyes shining with restrained tears. "I am leaving. You do not need to carry the burden of me anymore. You deserve freedom, not chains tied to a mistake." His jaw tightened, his fists clenched. Anger flashed, but beneath it was something deeper, something he refused to name. He took a step forward, then stopped, as if torn between pride and pain. "Finally," he said coldly, "do what you want." The words were sharp, but his eyes betrayed him. She saw the conflict, the hesitation, but she did not linger. She bowed her head once, a silent farewell, then turned and walked away. Her footsteps echoed in the marble hall like a drumbeat of finality. When the heavy doors closed behind her, the mansion fell into silence. That night, he sat alone in the library, staring at her abandoned sketchbook left on the table. He opened it, flipping through the pages filled with her sorrow, her resilience, her heart. The last drawing stopped him cold. It was of him, standing in the garden, not as a powerful man, but as a lonely figure surrounded by empty space. Beneath it, in faint pencil, were the words, "I wish I could have been enough." His chest tightened painfully. For the first time, he realized that her presence had never been his prison, it had been his light. And now, that light had walked out of his life. In the quiet emptiness, he understood what he had lost. She had left behind silence, but also the undeniable truth. She had loved him, even when love meant sacrifice. News of her departure spread quickly, and with it came the venom of scandal. Rumors twisted the truth into cruel lies, painting her as an impostor who had schemed her way into wealth. Headlines screamed betrayal, and whispers followed her wherever she went. Alone, she endured the storm quietly, clutching her sketchbook as her only source of strength. But fate had not finished with her. 1 week after she left, evidence surfaced that turned the story upside down. A trusted employee in the Groom's household uncovered documents, financial records, falsified hospital reports, and secret agreements. The truth was damning. It was her own family, not her, who had orchestrated the deception. They had hidden the sister's true condition. They had arranged the false marriage, and they had forced the younger daughter into the role of sacrificial bride. She had not been the deceiver. She had been the victim all along. The revelation shook the mansion. At a press conference called to protect the family's name, the groom stood before flashing cameras. His posture was straight, his eyes sharp, but his voice carried both anger and resolve. The woman you judged was not guilty. She was used by those she trusted most. She carried the weight of lies that were never hers to bear. From this day forward, I will not allow her name to be tarnished again. Oh, gasps filled the room, reporters scribbling frantically. For the first time, he spoke not with cold distance, but with conviction that cut through the noise. His parents sat silently, unable to deny the evidence. The truth had been laid bare for all to see. Later, he sought her out. He found her in a modest apartment on the edge of the city, sitting by the window with her sketchbook on her lap. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes widened with disbelief. She rose quickly, as if ready to flee, but his voice stopped her. "You do not have to run anymore. Everyone knows the truth now." Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. "It does not change anything. The damage is done. I am still the woman who stood in a wedding dress that was not mine." He stepped closer, his expression fierce yet vulnerable. "No, you are the woman who endured humiliation to protect a sister, who carried pain in silence, and who showed me what honesty truly looks like. You were never the imposter. You were the only one who lived with integrity." The weight of his words broke the dam inside her. Tears streamed down her face as her body shook with sobs she had buried for far too long. For the first time, someone had defended her, not as a pawn, not as a stand-in, but as herself. The world now knew the truth. Justice had finally begun to unfold. But another truth lingered, unspoken, yet undeniable. Their story was not finished. Something deeper, stronger, had been planted in the ruins of betrayal, and it was waiting to bloom. The night was quiet when he finally spoke the words that had been building in his heart. Standing in her small apartment, surrounded by sketches of sorrow and resilience, he reached into his coat and pulled out the marriage contract. With steady hands, he tore it down the middle, then tore it again, until nothing but shreds remained. The sound was sharp, final, a declaration that the chains binding them had been broken. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What are you doing?" His voice was firm, yet gentle. "Ending the lie. That contract was never love. It was never truth. But I want something more than a contract. I want you. Not as a stand-in, not as a replacement, but as yourself." He took a step closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Will you give me the chance to start over, this time by choice?" Her tears fell freely, but this time they were not born of despair. She had lived so long in shadows, never chosen, always forced. To hear those words, to see the paper that had stolen her freedom reduced to scraps on the floor, was more than she had ever dared hope. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "You would choose me, even after everything?" He nodded, his voice steady. "Especially after everything. Because through it all, you were the only one who stood with honesty. You were the only one who showed me what love could really mean." Slowly, as if afraid the moment would vanish, she stepped forward. He reached for her hand, and when their fingers intertwined, it was not a bond of duty, but of devotion. For the first time, she felt seen not as a sister's shadow, not as a contract bride, but as a woman worthy of love. Months later, under the glow of the evening sun, they stood together in the garden of the mansion. This time, there were no contracts, no hidden agendas. She wore a simple dress, and he wore a suit without grandeur. Their families, once divided by lies, now stood silently, humbled by the truth that had been revealed. As they exchanged vows, his voice was filled with conviction. "I promise to love you, not because I must, but because I choose to. I promise to stand by you, not out of duty, but out of devotion. Today, I marry you not for reputation, not for wealth, but for the truth we found together." Her reply was soft, yet strong. "And I promise to walk beside you, not as a shadow, but as your equal. I promise to love you not as a role, but as myself." When their lips met, the crowd erupted with applause, but to them the world had faded. It was no longer a story of deception or sacrifice. It was a story of love reclaimed, of justice found, of two hearts choosing each other freely. The woman who once stood in another's wedding gown now stood as herself, and the man who once looked at her with anger now held her with love. Together, they walked forward, not as prisoners of circumstance, but as partners bound by choice, by truth, and by love.